Welcome to another deep dive with yours truly. Today we're tackling some pretty big questions about consciousness and reality. But here's the thing. Our main source isn't a textbook or a scientific study. It's something completely different. We're diving into the world of Seth.
Seth, yeah.
Oh,
He's described as this multidimensional teacher,
yeah.
and he shared his ideas by communicating through a woman named Jane Roberts.
Right, Jane Roberts. And the way this information came about is fascinating. Imagine Seth, this non-physical being, dictating entire chapters to Jane while she was in a trance. Jane's husband was there too, taking notes. And they eventually put it all together into these books.
And what's really interesting is that Jane, she wasn't just passively channeling this information. She was skeptical at first. She even talks about feeling disconnected from the whole process, almost like she was surprised when she saw the finished product. It really shows you how unique this material is.
Yeah, it's like she was a radio or something, tuning into a frequency beyond our normal perception. And Seth was broadcasting through her.
I like that. A radio. Now, one of Seth's core teachings, and this one might surprise you, is that consciousness isn't limited to the physical world. It's actually the foundation of everything, even matter, the stuff we can see and touch.
So are you saying that instead of our brains creating consciousness, it's more like they're receiving it, filtering this huge ocean of awareness into our everyday reality? So then could we potentially tap into other levels of reality, almost like switching channels on a TV?
That's one way to think about it. Seth talks about this thing called the inner ego. It's this part of us that can perceive things beyond our normal senses, like a sixth sense, allowing us to tune into this bigger picture of reality.
Whoa, that's wild. So that means we have a lot more potential than we realize. But if consciousness is creating the world around us, does that mean my thoughts are shaping my reality? Like if I imagine winning the lottery, boom, I'm suddenly a millionaire.
Well, hold on. It's not quite that simple. But Seth does say our beliefs have a huge influence on the reality we experience. It's not just about positive thinking, though. It's more about understanding how our perceptions, fears, and expectations shape the world around us.
Got it. So it's a bit more complex than just wishing things into existence. But still, the idea that my thoughts and beliefs are actively shaping my reality, that's pretty profound.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another one of Seth's big ideas that might really challenge your understanding of self, the multidimensional self.
Yeah, now we're getting into the really mind-bending stuff. So what exactly is this multidimensional self? It sounds like it's more than just our physical bodies and personalities.
Yeah. Seth describes the multidimensional self as something that exists beyond the limitations of time and space as we normally think of them. Imagine a version of you that's not bound by linear time, experiencing past, present, and future all at once.
So it's not like we have a separate soul floating around somewhere. It's more like our consciousness is part of this larger multidimensional tapestry.
You got it. That's a great way to put it. And this multidimensional self, according to Seth, is connected to all other consciousnesses, creating this vast web of shared experiences and possibilities.
Wow. We're all connected on a much deeper level than we realize. That's a pretty amazing concept.
It is, and this interconnectedness, it has some really interesting implications, especially when we start talking about reincarnation and probable realities, which we'll dive into in a bit.
Reincarnation and probable realities. Okay, let's get into it. My mind is still trying to wrap itself around this whole multi-dimensional self thing.
Yeah, these are definitely some of Seth's most thought-provoking ideas. So reincarnation, most people have heard about reincarnation, that we live multiple lives, but Seth goes a bit deeper. He suggests that we actually choose these lives. And it's not about like karma or reward or punishment. It's more about choosing experiences that help us grow and learn.
So it's not about being good or bad in this life and going to heaven or hell in the next. It's more like each lifetime is a class we're signing up for, and it's tailored to the specific lessons we need to learn.
Yeah, that's the idea. Like each lifetime is a chance to explore different aspects of ourselves and the universe. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Seth introduces this idea of probable selves.
Probable selves. Okay, now you have my attention.
So imagine that there are many different versions of you existing in alternate realities, and they're all making different choices, experiencing different things, and learning different lessons. These are your probable selves.
So there's a version of me out there who decided to be a rock star instead of a podcaster, and another one who maybe became a chef or an astronaut.
Exactly. It's like those choose-your-own-adventure books. But on a cosmic scale, and get this, Seth says we can actually connect with these probable selves.
Oh, really? So can we call them up or something, like on a multidimensional phone?
Not exactly. But Seth suggests we can tap into their experiences and knowledge through things like our intuition, our dreams, and even those benign intrusive impulses we mentioned earlier.
You mean those sudden urges we get to learn a new skill or travel to a random place? Those could be messages from our other selves, guiding us toward new possibilities.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. It's like we have a whole team of advisors, each with different perspectives and experiences, whispering possibilities to us. And it's not just about our individual probable selves either. Seth talks about probable realities on a much grander scale.
So, alternate histories where major events played out differently, like a world where the Roman Empire never fell or where electricity was never discovered.
Exactly. Seth suggests that our planet has unfolded in countless different ways, each one a probable outcome based on the choices and actions of all the beings involved. And even though these probable realities might seem totally separate, he says there's a deep connection between them, a kind of unconscious collective memory that transcends time.
So we're all part of this huge, multidimensional tapestry. It's mind-boggling, but it's also kind of comforting, Like, even if I mess things up in this reality, there's another version of me out there somewhere who's killing it.
That's one way to look at it. And this idea of interconnectedness, it leads us to another fascinating part of Seth's teachings, what happens after death.
The afterlife. Does Seth describe pearly gates and fluffy clouds, or is it something completely different?
Seth's perspective on the afterlife is definitely not what you'd find in a traditional religious text. He describes it as a very dynamic and evolving process, not some static destination, and he calls it the in-between state. It's this transitional period that's unique to each individual.
So it's not about being judged and sent to heaven or hell. It's more personal.
Yeah, it's much more nuanced than that. Seth says that our beliefs and expectations play a huge role in shaping our experience after death. He even talks about this man who died expecting a showdown between Moses and Allah for his soul, because he had this really mixed religious upbringing.
That's hilarious and kind of mind-blowing, too. It shows that we take our biases and preconceived notions with us, even beyond the physical realm. So does that mean ghosts and hauntings could be real, or they're just lingering consciousnesses stuck in the in-between?
Seth does say that ghosts are real manifestations of consciousness, but not in the way we typically think. They're not fully focused in our reality, more like they're in a state of partial materialization. And they're often tied to specific locations or emotional patterns from their past lives.
So like echoes of personalities. Stuck in a loop, replaying some unfinished business. That's kind of spooky, but also fascinating. And it makes me wonder if some of the strange things people report, the unexplained phenomena, could actually be glimpses into these other realities or dimensions.
That's a really interesting idea. And speaking of dimensions, this whole idea that consciousness exists beyond the body, it leads us to one of Seth's most profound teachings, the nature of reality itself.
Okay, let's tackle the big question. If our senses are just filters shaping our perception of a much broader spectrum of existence, then what is reality really? Is it all just an illusion? Like, are we all plugged into some kind of matrix? So if reality isn't just the stuff we can see and touch, what is it? Does Seth give us like a different way to think about this whole reality thing?
He does. Seth's perspective on reality is pretty mind-blowing. He suggests that what we experience as real and solid is just one way of interpreting a much vaster, multidimensional existence. It's not that the physical world is fake or anything. It's more like we're seeing a simplified version, like a tiny slice of a much grander picture.
So our senses are kind of like those old video games with the blocky graphics. We're getting the basic idea, but the real reality has way more detail and complexity going on. Does he give any examples to help us understand that?
Yeah, he does. One analogy he uses is actors on a stage. He says the physical world is like the set, our senses are the costumes, and we're all playing our roles. But even when an actor is really into their role, they still know there's a whole world beyond the stage.
That's a great way to put it. So we're not just puppets in some predetermined play. We have the potential to step outside the limitations and experience something way bigger. So how do we do that? Does Seth give us any practical advice?
He does. He mentions techniques like dream work and meditation. But he also says it's important to question our assumptions about reality. He wants us to look beyond the surface and consider that things might not be as fixed and solid as they seem.
It's like he's saying, don't just accept the default settings, explore the hidden menus and see what else is possible. And speaking of hidden menus, Seth also talks about some historical insights that really challenge the way we think about the past. Earlier, we were talking about the Lumanians, this ancient civilization that supposedly went in a very different direction. What other historical stuff does he mention?
One thing that really stood out to me was his description of these beings that lived way before Neanderthals. He says they were super advanced in their communication and they had a deep understanding of nature, almost like they represent a missing link in human evolution.
It's interesting how often Seth's teachings kind of echo ancient myths and legends. Makes you wonder if those stories we often dismiss as fantasy might actually hold some truth about our past.
I agree. It really speaks to Seth's idea about the evolution of consciousness. He says it's not just a linear progression, it's this multidimensional exploration with infinite possibilities.
So we're not just climbing a ladder towards enlightenment, we're expanding outwards in all directions, discovering new things about ourselves and the universe with every lifetime, every choice we make.
Exactly. And that brings us to another fascinating piece of Seth's teachings that we haven't talked about yet, his perspective on the life of Christ.
Oh yeah, I'm curious about that. It's a topic that's always been really interesting to me, but I haven't found an interpretation that really resonated.
Well, get ready for this, because Seth suggests that the historical figure we know as Jesus was just one part of a larger entity. He says this entity was composed of three distinct personalities.
Three personalities in one being. That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
I know, right? It definitely challenges the way we usually think about things.
Mm-hmm.
Seth explains that these three personalities, even though they lived in separate lifetimes, they were all deeply connected, sharing a common purpose and this deep understanding of spiritual truth.
So like they were a team, each playing a specific role in this grand cosmic plan.
Exactly. Seth says that one of these personalities was John the Baptist, who prepared the way for the second personality, Jesus. And then the third personality, this one was like a zealot, he set up the structure for spreading Christ's teachings. But Seth says he also kind of accidentally introduced some distortions that would have long-lasting effects.
A zealot. That seems kind of contradictory. We usually think of zealots as being super devoted to their cause, sometimes to the point of violence.
You're right.
Yeah.
And Seth acknowledges that. He claims that this third personality was actually Paul, the one who originally opposed the teachings of Christ, but then he had this huge transformation and became a passionate advocate for the new faith.
So we're talking about a totally different understanding of early Christian history. What about this third personality then? If the first two have already lived out their roles, where does this third one fit in?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Seth claims this third personality hasn't emerged yet. He's destined to come sometime in the future, to guide humanity towards a deeper understanding of spiritual truth.
So like a second coming, but not the traditional kind. This third personality is not Jesus reincarnated. It's the final part of this three-part being, and he's coming to complete the mission.
Yeah, that's the idea. And Seth says that this third personality will usher in a new era of spiritual understanding. We'll move beyond the symbolism and dogma that's often associated with organized religion. He'll help us connect to a more universal spirituality.
It's like all these pieces of the puzzle are coming together to show us a much bigger picture of who we are and what we're capable of.
Exactly. And that's what I find so exciting and inspiring about Seth's teachings. They encourage us to look at ourselves and the universe in a new way, to question our limits and embrace all the possibilities that are out there.
This deep dive into Seth has been amazing. We've talked about consciousness, the power of belief, the interconnectedness of everything, and the potential that's inside each of us.
It's been a great journey, and I hope you're leaving with a sense of wonder, a renewed curiosity about the mysteries of reality. Remember, this is just the beginning.
It is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And if Seth's right about our thoughts shaping reality, let's all choose to create a reality filled with love, compassion, and endless possibilities.